back, you!
Sometimes you come across a game that's beyond descriptions, that's impossible for you to describe. Like the feeling of playing it can't be put into words to tell anyone why you liked it. Most of the time it's a game you didn't have that high hopes for in the first place. Maybe you picked it up because of the soundtrack, or because it was cheap, or just because, and it stuck with you. This isn't the first time that's happened, but my most recent example of this is Lucas Pope's detective mystery, Return of the Obra Dinn. While you can probably guess how I stand with this game after this grand statement, it's by no means perfect. And as much as I want to give you an impression of the game, it's also a video for me to finally describe this indescribable game. This game isn't for everyone, maybe even more so than any other game I've reviewed so far, but maybe I can convince even some of you to give it a try. This game didn't come out of left field for me. I loved the developer's first hit Papers, Please, and was pretty intrigued when he released a short alpha for Obra Dinn in 2014. I just for the life of me couldn't figure out what to do though, and blamed that on the fact that it was, in fact, an alpha. Lo and behold, I played the demo again when I beat the full version, and it turns out, even then it was almost identical to the game I just beat. I don't know exactly what that says about me, but it shows that Lucas Pope had a real vision when he made this game, one that would even stand true so many years later. Since the demo went completely over my head, the only thing I really remembered the game for was the art style. When I saw the game on the Steam front page, I immediately knew what that meant. Although I almost never pick up games at full price, I dared the plunge into the cold water and paid the €17. And even though I didn't play my price in hours, I still think I got my money's worth. And then some. But enough backstory. What about the game itself? There are a number of things you realize about the game shortly after you start it up. Firstly, obviously, the 1-bit aesthetic. But I can't really talk about the graphics at this time, so let's just skip that for now. It isn't long until Return of the Obra Dinn exposes itself as a detective mystery. There were 60 people that went missing together with a ship a few years prior, and you have to deduce the identity and fate of every single one. For that huge task, you are given 2 tools, an almost empty book that will catalog every death you encounter, and the magic pocket watch Memento Mortem. When used on a corpse, you can hear the last few seconds of what the victim heard, as well as examine their surroundings at the exact moment they died, while the time around you stands still. You will have to piece together the entire story surrounding the Obra Dinn's disappearance by clinging onto each person's tragic death. Sounds kinda poetic when you think about it, doesn't it? And just like poetry, there's rarely concrete information, and everyone seems to be deliberately vague. Some deaths are straightforward, like executions where the captain proclaims the name of the traitor, but most of the time you'll have to work with circumstantial evidence. A few deductions are more comparable to shots in the dark, but it's the name of the game to rather write down something than to come back empty-handed. And since you will only know whether your presumptions were right when you get 3 fates correct, you're encouraged to hang onto every morsel of detail and make up the wildest theories. It isn't long until you instinctively wait a few seconds after filling out a page, hoping for the screen to turn black. That moment feels like it has all the tension in the world, and when it finally happened, and that short song played, I just loved the game a little bit more. But while this system is perfect for building tension, it can also be used to cheat the system and get validation for a fate by trial and error. I won't lie, I did cheese my way through a particular difficult set of passengers, but after that I did everything as intended. It may have taken longer to find solid evidence for most people, but it was just crazy rewarding. I would compare the feeling to beating a hard boss, if not for the fact that that comparison is as played out as the game it's based on. What the hell. It's such a small gesture, the game just saying an unceremoniously well done, but it's the fact that the game doesn't berate you with all that usual fanfare that it can trigger such a strong and pure feeling of gratification. I don't know, but it feels like I'm describing Obra Dinn as the gateway drug into murder mysteries. Speaking of murder mysteries, Obra Dinn reminds me of the Ace Attorney games a lot. You will have to take in everything surrounding a specific event and build your own narrative in your mind before you can start poking into the matter. But contrary to Ace Attorney, there's no hand-holding and no linear path through every chapter of the journey. At one minute you're watching some accidents while they were loading the cargo. The next you're hearing about a mutiny that was brewing days later. A mutiny that you already witnessed earlier into the game that ties the whole story together. This non-linearity had me sitting on the edge of my seat at all times, thinking about every possibility. Did he just trip and die because he was unlucky, or was it because of the illness that seems to have infected some of the passengers? And if that's the case, is it safe to assume he's from the same place as the other guy who had the illness? Trains of thought like this are not uncommon for this game, especially when you know you have every piece of the puzzle already in your head. In reviews, many people criticize the brisk pace this game has. While I wouldn't completely agree to this, I can understand their complaints, since the game just leads you from one corpse to another in quick succession. If you don't take them by yourself, you won't get any break to reflect on what you have seen, so be sure to take your time. To bring up Ace Attorney again, the most frustrating part is when the game doesn't let you make your own deductions. You're bound to the observations that game wants you to make. It always feels self-defeating, especially if you made the right deduction, but presented the wrong of the two pieces of evidence that prove your point. Obra Dinn avoids this problem completely, because there are often multiple ways to identify a person, be it the accent, the work they are doing, where they are in relation to others, or what items they're using. It's honestly terrifying how much work has been put into making sure that everyone's just cryptic enough to pose a challenge, but just transparent enough to be figured out from multiple angles. For this to work, you obviously have to be able to put complete faith into the developer and to believe in everything the game throws at you. And to that end, it's no exaggeration for me to say that Obra Dinn is one of the most airtight experiences that I've ever seen. Lucas Pope was able to build a coherent narrative even though you witness most of it in reverse chronological order. All parts of the game are exceptional on their own, but put together, they give the game its special something that so many games lack nowadays.
Keep pressure here.
Hold him down. What madness is this? 20 years my steward, and never a doubt on your sanity. Explain yourself.
The soundscape is superb. Be it the atmospheric music, the voice acting, or just the sound of people working or fighting. Since you'll only be able to hear most of the things while the screen is black, it's doubly important for everything heard to match the time-frozen moment that follows. Every character has its own voice, and most of them even have accents, so some characters can actually be identified early by recognizing their accent. The complete soundtrack only seems to be about 30 minutes long, but if you played Papers, Please, you know that Lucas Pope wouldn't actually need more than a handful of tracks to make a game. And it shows. Every track is memorable and fitting, and I swear, once you played the game, it's impossible not to nod to the beat of every song. It may not be a soundtrack to hear outside of the game, but in context it has just the right amount of ambience and suspense. Is it finally time to talk about the graphics? I think so. Well then, as you have probably already noticed, the game looks pretty unique. The 1-bit rendering style of old has a timeless charm that, in my opinion, proves that there's still a place for retro looks in video games. I fell in love at first sight, and I still can't get enough of it, but I also understand that it might not be everyone's cup of tea. Those people would be obviously wrong, but who am I to judge? Besides, the art style does more than just look pretty, in that it even enhances the mystery. The atmosphere on the ship is serene and quiet, and at the same time, awfully eerie. It makes sense that the art style for a game about a ship that's past its prime and out of place would fit an aesthetic that's the exact same. It also makes the violence look less extreme and gives it a bit more chill than what you would normally expect from a game about a literal massacre. In the beginning, every member of the crew will look the same to you, but after some time you start remembering faces. You will start seeing how everything and everyone is connected, and you will learn the routine of the ship just by proxy. It may not look like it at first, but the graphic style is integral to the game experience, and I believe the game would suffer by having a more realistic look. Also, I just like inventive monochrome art styles, I guess. Every piece is just handled masterfully, and in tandem, they produce a narrative that feels more complete than most other game could ever dream to be. That doesn't mean there aren't games with better plots. There certainly are. But the way Obra Dinn reinvents how mechanics and interactivity are used to tell a story is something I don't remember ever seeing, and certainly not in the AAA market. There are basically 60 main characters that each have their own screen time to tell their own little story that, put together, tell the tragic and personal tale of the disappearance of a ship. Return of the Obra Dinn was one of the rawest gameplay experiences that I've had in a long time. It didn't make me cry, or even sympathize with any of the characters beyond finding out how or why they died. No, what I felt was intrigue. That kind of intrigue, where you try to solve the crime at the same time as the detective. Only that in this game, you are the detective. I would be laying in bed and still try to figure out who was who and why he died. It kept me awake. If any of what I said sounds interesting, the game is available on Steam for a bit over 16 euros or whatever that equals in your currency. It's honestly one of the best games that came out 2018, and that's saying something. Obra Dinn showed me just how much there's still left to explore in this interactive medium that we like to call video games. And in a market flooded with sequels and remakes, it shows that maybe sometimes we should stop and look back on what we lost in our rush to find the next big thing. Because sometimes, the best stories may have been lost to time, just waiting to be rediscovered.